Hey guys, welcome to week 2 of
Hey,
See No
everybody.
Evil.
What's up?
What's up? We're here with my man Isaac and Braden, and it's going to be a powerful night as we can kind of continue in this series talking about injustice. And to kind of kick us off tonight, we're going to ask this question: do you ever get annoyed with all the rules you have to follow? Because if you're like me, like I'm a rule breaker, but I don't want to be a rule breaker, if that makes sense. Like there's something when I see a rule, there's a big part of me that's like, I'm going to do everything I can to break that rule.
Right.
You know? I mean, it's like, I feel like that's just who I am, you know?
Like I remember when I was a little kid, my dad, for some reason, we were filling up a bucket of water, and it was probably cold outside. He didn't want me to get like a fever or something, so he didn't want me to touch that water. But I slowly but surely just like kept creeping my hand closer and closer to the water, and he was like, "Don't touch the water," until I just went like this, touched it, and like looked at him. In that moment, I just hear like. Bah, smacked my hand. And he was like, now touch the water. And I was like, no, I'm good now.
Dude, that's so awesome because like my mom has it on video of like I was like 2 and she's like, don't touch the TV, and I touched the TV and she smacked my hand and then I like touched it again and looked at her. Like, I mean, it's been in me since like I was
rule
little,
breaker.
You know? Yeah, and my daughter, to be honest, is the same way. Like she's,
Man.
I'm like, why are you like this? And then I remember it's me. But the truth is, like, I think all of us have that in us a little bit. Like when we see a rule, it's like, oh my gosh, why are these rules? And if you like on social media right now, there's a huge debate about, you know, COVID-19. There's tons of rules going on, like to wear the mask or not to wear mask. We say wear the mask. But at the same sense, like there's tons of people going crazy about it. Like I don't want to wear the mask and all this other stuff. And even there's a sense too, for me, is like, am I following all the rules? Like every store has a different rule.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of
So
rules with
many.
COVID-19. So it's like, I don't want to break the rules, but sometimes it's like anxiety attacks you.
Yeah.
But I think in all that, we agree that some part of us doesn't want to follow all the rules. But I think there's even a more thing that we can get and say that's more annoying than rules, and that's someone who makes a rule but then doesn't follow their own rule, right?
Yep.
I mean, for instance, like this. It's like when your mom tells you not to speed, but yet they break a land speed record leaving soccer practice to get home to watch the Bachelor finale,
Exactly.
right? I mean,
or like when like your parents like tell you not to use a certain language and then they use it.
yes.
Like what?
Yeah.
Or even when like one of your friends, lectures you about all the bad decisions you made last Friday, but then next Friday they go out and pretty much do the same exact thing.
And then they like put it all over Snapchat.
Yeah,
Snapchat, yeah,
all
it's
over
there.
social.
Come on, bro.
Come on, man. But listen, that's all annoying, and all of us would agree with that. Because when we place a rule on someone and they don't actually follow it, they're being hypocritical. And a hypocrite is someone who judges you for doing something they also do. And how does that make you feel? Like, not good, right? It makes you annoyed, frustrated, put off, generally mad. Because one of the things about hypocrites is not only are they annoying, but more importantly, they're not effective. Then you think about it. When someone holds you to a standard that you know that they're holding themselves to that doesn't make you, I'm sorry, I messed up. When someone holds you to a standard you know that they aren't holding themselves to, that doesn't want to make you like want to listen to them or follow them or trust them, not even a little bit, right? They lost their effectiveness because they didn't take their own advice. But you know what else is usually true about hypocrites? And this is good. They don't actually know they're hypocrites. So the reality is most people who treat other people this way don't see that they're actually doing it.
Well,
So what does all this have to do with injustice? Well, last week we said one of the ways we can start responding to all the injustice in the world is just by praying the simple prayer, God open my eyes.
Yeah.
And hopefully a lot of you guys did that, and I hope that you started to see things around you, maybe for the first time, and that's great. But as you open your eyes, you probably started to see some of the things, the people that are actually causing this injustice and evil that we keep seeing. Like maybe the corrupt leaders in countries that oppress their people.
Yeah. Or maybe it's the evil people who operate the sex trafficking industry.
or the unethical managers that use children to like work in factories and stuff.
Yeah. Or the racist people who just ignore or hurt those that don't look like them.
Yeah. Or maybe it's even the bully at your school.
Yeah, and when we open our eyes to the evil or injustice around you, you also see the people behind the injustice.
Yeah, I think it's probably true for all of us. When someone starts talking about injustice, we tend to start thinking about the people who are making that injustice happen. You know, we think about how bad they are. We think how wrong they are, and how someone should really like stop them. You know, we think about the punishment they deserve, because if we could just stop all the bad people in this world, the people who hurt us, oppress us, and take advantage of other people, then we'll solve all the problems and all the injustice in the world, right? And this is where hypocrites come in. Because I've got bad news for all of us. I think that when it comes to injustice, we're all a little bit hypocritical. And we don't even know it, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. And let me explain that. I'm not saying we're doing things as terrible as people in the news who are selling children or oppressing people. But what I am saying is this. I think that if we're honest, we all could admit that we sometimes hold other people to a standard of right and wrong that we do not apply to ourselves. Sure, we can point out the wrongs that we see in other people. But have we ever stopped to wonder if we're possibly guilty of the same things? Let me think about it. You know the guy who's just destroying other guys every day by making fun of them in the locker room and just quick to judge and quick to destroy anybody. And you're quick to tell that person that they're wrong and they're a bully, but then you go home and you make fun of your siblings or even your parents or step parents.
Or like maybe you hear and you start repeating a rumor or about that girl at a party, and you're thinking, I can't believe that they say that, you know. But then you go and check your DMs and you see a lot of the same comments, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or maybe you just see people treated differently based on their skin color or their rank in society, and like that is so evil. It's not right. But if you're honest, there's probably someone in your life that you treat differently based on some sort of stereotype or prejudice.
Yeah. Or maybe you see the guy who comes to small group every week and you think, that guy doesn't belong here, right? I know what he does for the rest of the week. I know what he does on the weekend. And that's not what a Christian should do. But you ever stop to think that the way that your words, your actions, or your choices may fall into the same category as that person? See, the truth is, we all call these attitudes and behaviors hypocritical, right? And the truth is, we're guilty of it. We're guilty of looking at some point, or we're looking at other people and pointing out the difficulties in the areas of their life where they're not measuring up. But yet we don't follow that same standard to ourselves. And the truth is, remember when we said people like that, that also includes people like us. Those people are not fun to be around, which means we may not always be fun to be around, we may not be effective, and we may be influencing people not in the way that we want, because we're not influencing people to represent Christ and the church that we want them to be a part of. But the good news here is this. Jesus gave a solution for this issue. And I think the solution not only helps us respond to injustice around us, but it also helps us to respond to the injustice in us.
And today we're going to look back in the book of Matthew, and this book is one of the Gospels that talks about Jesus' life, Matthew, one of his closest followers. And today's passage comes from one of Jesus' most famous messages known as the Sermon on the Mount. And a lot of people believe Jesus gave this message like many different times and many different versions. And so it's basically really important. Like he went back to these things as like the core teaching of his ministry. And so it's in Matthew chapter 5. We're going to look at part of it in verse 21. Here's what it says. You have heard that our ancestors were told, you must not murder. If you commit murder, you're subject to judgment. So that's pretty standard, basic. 10 commandments, like we all know that. No one's disagreeing with him at this point. But then right after that, he says, but I say, if you are even angry with someone, you are subject to judgment. So wait, like what? People are kind of like stepping back now. This is a little harder to like jump on his side because he's equating anger with murder. And I don't know about you, but for me, I'm angry with people, probably every day, honestly. I was probably angry with someone today, probably driving on the way here. I don't know, but
He's only been with us today.
Yeah.
I was.
Yeah.
But anyways, just to be clear, Jesus is basically saying when we're harsh with other people in our lives, we're going to receive the same judgment as those people that murder someone. And that's kind of like, what?
Yeah, that's insane. And then he keeps going on verse 27, and he says, you have heard the commandment that says, you must not commit adultery. But I say, anyone who even looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Like, whoa. Now, Jesus is like saying that thinking about sexual thoughts about someone is just as bad as doing it. Again, that's just crazy. Just what Jesus is doing here. When we hear the first half of that statement where Jesus commends murder and adultery, we're nodding along. We're like, yeah, sure, I get that, Those things are obviously wrong, and we're on board. We're confident those things are wrong because those are things that we would never do, right? So it's easy for us to see the injustice here. But the second half of those statements, when we hear them, those are the ones that we do all the time. And it's hard for us to see the injustice there.
Yeah. And I think that's what makes us hypocrites, because we're quick to judge someone for causing pain to someone else, but yet we tend to overlook our own words, choices, even thoughts that also cause pain. And you know what Jesus is saying is that he's saying that God isn't considering our negative actions. He sees the intent behind the actions, right? Even if it means that we didn't actually do or say something, it's still sinful to harbor those things in our heart or have those bad thoughts and those feelings in it. The injustice and sin is still there in us. Even though it wasn't expressed to someone else, we still had that judgment in us.
Yep.
And Jesus saying that is a big deal. See, if we want to be a generation that sees no evil, tolerates no evil, and stands up to injustice, then we can't just acknowledge it in other people. We have to acknowledge it in ourselves. We can't solve the problems of evil or injustice if we're harboring evil in our hearts. In other words, we can't solve a problem that we are contributing to.
Yeah, so where do we start? Well, Jesus, has some thoughts on that too, thankfully. And that's in Matthew chapter 7. He says this: "How can you think of saying to your friend, 'Let me help you get rid of that speck in your eye,' when you can't even see past the log in your own eye? Hypocrite, first get rid of the log in your eye, and you will see well enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye." So what does all this actually mean? Well, Jesus is saying, before we can tell someone else, what they're doing wrong, we have to first look within ourselves. We have to look at our hearts. We can't see a problem in someone else's life and feel the freedom to point it out if we're walking around, with giant planks of issues, in our own lives.
Yeah, and if we want to see the generation that takes the speck of injustice out of others' eyes, we must address first the plank that is in our own eyes. We cannot see how to fix issues around us if we're not first willing to fix ourselves. Because before you can act on the injustice around you, we've got to pay attention to the injustice in you.
Exactly, that's so good. And that's the one I want to try to do this week. Let's honestly examine the things in our hearts. Let's examine the things that are contributing to injustice in the world, but let's also open our eyes to the big and small ways that we're part of the problem. Maybe it's the words we use, the choices we make, or the thoughts that we think. Maybe in some ways we're guilty of injustice as well. And they may sting a little bit to hear, but the good news is we're not without redemption. Because of Jesus, whatever hypocritical wrongs that we may have committed can be made right. And that's great news.
Yeah.
But just like doing something about injustice around us has to start with seeing. So does something about the injustice, we have to do something with the injustice in us. You have to pay attention to the injustice in you. And as hard as it can be, you have to do something about that. So this week, let's start by praying this prayer. God, help me see the injustice in me. Ask him to open your eyes to things like this: hate for an individual,
Hate for a whole category of people.
Or anger over something that someone has done.
yeah, or lustful habits that objectify other people, or even supporting visiting sites that promote that kind of behavior.
Yeah, habits at school or home that exclude people or leave them out or treats them like they're not as important as you are.
And even maybe a lack of compassion for the people suffering in our world.
Or maybe even harsh words or thoughts that you've had concerning someone else, right? One of the things that I've been asking in the last couple of weeks is this question, is just kind of God to show me any wicked way in me. It comes from the book of Psalms, and it says this: God, show me any wicked way and lead me in the everlasting way. And that's one of the prayers that I've been praying, honestly, before this series. But in this series, as we prayed last week, God, open my eyes to things that I don't even see. And it's been so cool because God's been doing some really cool stuff in my life. Because the truth is, I would not consider myself someone, even like when we think about racism or something like that, I wouldn't consider myself a racist or anything like that. But there is a lot of things that I've discovered in my life that maybe I was taught or harboring that is not something that is, Jesus. It's not something that is Jesus in me. It's things that have been taught to me. And I had lunch last week with one of our students, and she said something that really challenged me. We were talking about this series that is coming up, and she said something. She said that racism is taught. And I was like, man, that is a great point, because racism is a really huge issue. And we talked about it last week, is like we need to love people like Jesus. Like Jesus doesn't see a color. Jesus loves every single person. But if you think about it, no one comes out of the womb hating another person. Like that's normally something taught. And I'm not bashing your parents or something like that, but that is something that I can identify with, because there are a lot of things that maybe I carried like a kind of a thought about a person or something like that because of something that I was taught, something I inherited from my parents or something like that. So the truth is, racism is something that is very taught. And one of the things, another cool moment that God's kind of been showing me, happened a couple weeks ago, and he's kind of right here, is my man Isaac. We went to lunch, we ate Mexican food because I love Mexican food. Y'all know that. But the truth is, we were just talking. And one of the things is Isaac opened my eyes, and I kind of asked him to share a little bit of story. He's going to share that in just a little bit. He opened my eyes because for me, me and Braden kind of have the same like testimony. I grew up in a town with not even a traffic light. Like we didn't even have a traffic light. We had a stop sign, right? I mean, like one stop sign. Like I graduated with 50 people in my class. Y'all are like, this guy's a hillbilly. That's probably true too. But the truth is, like, I mean, 5,000 people in my town. Like, I had never met someone who was from another country who moved to America. And me and Isaac were just sitting there eating Mexican food, and I started asking him about his life. And you guys may know this about Isaac. He doesn't, talk about it, I guess, a lot. But the truth is, Isaac spent majority of his life in another country. He's from Cuba.
Yeah.
You guys may know that. He just became an American citizen like over a year ago. Like, whoop, whoop, right? Yeah. But he shared some of this. He was just talking about life growing up as a teenager living in Cuba. So I just asked him to kind of share a little bit about that with you guys.
Oh, yeah. And that was such a good conversation for us to have. Just really quick, just to simplify everything. Basically, when I was about almost 7, 8 years old, my grandpa won some sort of contest, lottery. I don't really know how it worked. Basically, he was able to get, the government was able to expedite basically all the processes and get him to move to the United States right away, which was like really cool. But the first thing he was like, hey, I'm not going to do this if you guys are not going to come with me. Like, I'm not going to live in the United States by myself. So basically, he goes to the United States. He starts working right away. They give him a job to get him started. A year later, he brings his wife over, my grandma, and they immediately get to work on being secure and being stable so that they can bring us over, because that was the plan all along. And they started the process, and they tell us about it, and we're super excited, but at the same time, we're kind of like afraid, During my whole life in school and my neighborhood, I've always been told about how scary United States can be, how scary America can be. Yeah. They showed us certain pictures and certain videos at school to kind of paint this picture and to teach us that the United States was bad. We lived in a communist country where our government, for some reason, doesn't like the United States that bad. Or that well. So we were taught to think that the United States was this whole scary place. Well, the process, our grandpa started sending us videos of how his new life in the United States was. And I looked at those and I was like, that's not what they show us, Yeah. That's not really what we see on school or in media. And then the process took 9 years. We finally got to come here, and then coming here, being a little nervous, but seeing how, yes, there is violence in the world. Yes, there is violence in our city. There is violence in our schools and stuff. But it's not really the picture that they painted us, in school and everything like that. So that's kind of like a little concise story.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a powerful testimony just hearing him talk, and I'm sure he'd share a lot more with you if you have questions about that. But, it's kind of cool, like, as we had this conversation, and this is not to be political, like, I'm not a political person whatsoever, but as we were sitting there, and I've been praying this, God, show me any wicked way, and even the same sense, all the racism going around in the world, I'm asking, God, show me areas that maybe I was taught racism, show me areas that maybe I'm carrying something in my life that is not you. I'm not loving every single person like I'm supposed to. And if I'm totally honest, we were talking about just, why would someone, as Isaac, came here to seek asylum from Cuba and everything like that, why would someone risk everything just to be in our country illegally? And then it's, like I said, not political whatsoever. And Isaac said something that completely changed my life because I never thought of it like this. He said, in Cuba, they're limiting like how many groceries you can like buy. Like that's where he grew up. That's like the life he lived in. Like none of us have that. Like your parents may limit like what you buy, how much chocolate milk you can have and stuff like that. But no one's telling you like, hey, you can't do this and this and this. Like the government's literally restricting the food that you have.
Yeah.
And he said something. He's like, some people, like a lot of men, will risk everything they can to get to America because if they don't, their family will die because they can't feed them. Like their government will not allow them to feed them. Yeah. And I was like, man, that's crazy. Like, I never thought of that, right? A lot of injustice that I had in me because I never met someone from another country who was who dealt with communism and all that stuff like that, like I carried a lot of thoughts in my mind that
Yeah.
honestly weren't healthy and weren't like good.
Yeah.
And then it was kind of just a cool deal. So I guess my point of all telling you that is this: I think a lot of us need to start asking the question, God, show me the injustice in me, and maybe even the situation. Like, show me any area where I am racist. Show me some areas where I've been taught things. And I could share a lot more things about my upbringing, things like that. That God is like having to work through and break down walls that were built up and taught to me. The truth is, but that's what we want to do. That's kind of what we're saying today. Pay attention to the injustice in you.
Yeah, and I can so relate to that, just not seeing things
Yeah.
and like thinking things are supposed to be a certain way when they're not. And God has opened my eyes to many things too. And just as we wrap up tonight, when you ask God to help you see, like we have done, it's not necessarily like the most comfortable thing. It sometimes hurts.
Yeah.
And when you see bad things in yourself, it doesn't feel good. But we can commit, like when we see those things, to start taking steps towards the right thing. And that's kind of like what we want you to do now. And maybe it's like just simply changing some behavior in some ways, or your thoughts about certain people, or it might take accountability from a friend or a small group to help you change these thoughts or beliefs that you have. And it might even mean going to someone and asking them for forgiveness for treating them in a way that you shouldn't have.
Yeah.
And whatever it is, we want you to ask God to help you see and then do something about the injustice in you.
Absolutely. And I think like some of this sounds crazy. You're like, man, this is, it's crazy, right? And here's the truth is, I read this too, and this is part of the journey that God's been leading me to in the last couple of weeks is, it doesn't matter where you feel like, you may be looking and going, I love all people the same. Like, it doesn't matter. I don't see different things. I don't have any injustice in me. And I would just encourage you to, why don't you just ask him? Like, why don't you just ask him? Like, there's no danger. If you think that there's nothing that you're holding or harboring, why don't you just ask God? And the truth is, maybe you are. Maybe right now there's things that you're harboring and you're trying to justify all the reasons that you're harboring those thoughts. Would you just like stop for a second and just say, God, show me the injustice in me? It doesn't mean you have to understand everything, but can we just open ourselves to see another person's world?
Yeah.
Can we say, God, show me the injustice in me? Don't let me hold other people to a standard that I'm not willing to hold myself to.
Yeah.
And just imagine what kind of effect. Like, if everybody in the world did this, but just imagine the effect that would happen for every single person watching this. Every single person is sitting in the room watching this with you. As you're about to have a discussion about it, imagine if you guys all started to look and say, God, show me the injustice in me. Like, let me not hold other people to a higher standard than I'm holding myself to. And remember, you got to pay attention to the injustice in you, because too much is at stake for us to keep living our lives like nothing is ever wrong. God is calling you to be a generation that does something about the injustice in his name. And that includes the injustice in us. It's always easier to notice it in someone else, but we can't fix the problem outside of ourselves and ignore the problem that's a part of us. Because once we get the planks out of our own eyes, I believe that God is going to open our eyes in new ways to speak to the injustice around the whole entire world and around every single one of us. Yeah. Listen, you're going to head to small groups right now, but have a conversation about this. I just challenge you once again, just start to ask the question, God, teach me, God, show me. Is there any wicked way in me? And God, open my eyes God, open my eyes and help me see any injustice around me.
So good.
Yes. Listen, guys, we love you guys. We'll see you next week. And next week, we have a special guest. It's going to be a great conversation.
Yes.
One of my great friends. You guys love him so much, too. He's going to be on Skype with us. Trot Williams is going to be here. It's going to be awesome. So, listen, tune in, be a part of your small group, and continue to have fun, man. We miss you guys.
See you then.
See ya.